talk about folk music of the 1960s, what names come to mind? Bob Dylan? Joan Baez? Peter, Paul, and/or Mary? Nobody, because you're probably not over 60? If you're under 60, by the way, please stay. I swear it's interesting. Does the name Phil Oakes ring a bell? If it does, you're way ahead of me. If it doesn't, keep listening. One of the 60s best-kept secrets, the unpolished gem of the Greenwich Village folk revival, Phil Oakes was a topical songwriter, an activist, a human being, a man with a message and a driving force to fight for what he believed in, a man whose voice you need and deserve to hear. Phil Oakes had something to say, and I'm going to say it now. This is God Help the Troubadour, the eternal voice of Phil Oakes. Part 1. All the news that's fit to sing. Scotland-born Gertrude Finn was accustomed to a certain degree of luxury. Her husband, Jacob Oakes, known to the world as Jack, struggled to provide Gertrude with the comfort she so desired, despite his status as a doctor. Even though the family was living in New Mexico, when the time came for the birth of their second child, Gertrude, believing herself entitled to the pinnacle of medical care, opted for a hospital an hour and a half away in El Paso, Texas. There, Philip David Oakes was born on December 19th, 1940, 3 years after his big sister Sonia, later known as Sonny. Another 3 years later, while their father was stationed overseas as a medic in World War II, little Michael was born, thus rounding out the Oakes family. They lived a nomadic lifestyle, at first because of Jack's military service, and subsequently because Jack failed to establish his own practice, instead moving from one tuberculosis hospital to another, eventually settling in Columbus, Ohio. Jack, whether physically present or not, was rarely there. His ghostly demeanor and bouts of depression and mania were only exacerbated by his time spent in the war and a stint in a psychiatric hospital. Echoing the inattentive nature of his father, Philip was a quiet and oblivious boy, living in his own little world. He built his world around movies, as his mother was more inclined to send Philip and his siblings to the movie house than to hire a babysitter. Raised by John Wayne and Audie Murphy, Philip was with them when he was staring vacantly out the window in class or leaving his school books on the streetcar. Philip went most of his adolescence without any friends, thanks to the transient nature of his family. Not that he minded much. Still, Philip and kid brother Michael would learn to defend themselves from a fair share of often anti-Semitic bullying. It wasn't until Philip was 16 that he would make his first friend, Dave Sweezy, a rough and unkempt boy who liked going to the movies just as much as he did. Philip's other great love was music. As a preteen, he took to playing the clarinet. Took to it so well, in fact, that his skill rose to almost prodigy level, thanks to hours of practice, which invited complaints from the neighbors. In an evaluation, his music instructor wrote, "You have exceptional musical feeling, and the ability to transfer it onto your instrument is abundant." Though he played classical music on the clarinet, what he chose to listen to on the radio was rock and roll and country music. Philip adored early rock stars like Buddy Holly and Elvis Presley, and country stars like Farron Young, Ernest Tubb, Hank Williams Sr., and Johnny Cash. Gertrude, fed up with riffraff like Dave Sweezy from Philip's current school, urged Philip to attend a private school for his junior and senior year. Philip balked at this, and in return, his mother instructed him to find an alternative. In the New York Times Magazine, Philip noticed an ad for Staunton Military Academy in Virginia. Seeing a marching band in the picture, Philip had landed on his alternative. From 1956 to 1958, future anti-war left-wing protest folk singer Phil Oakes would attend military school. At Staunton, Philip continued to play the clarinet and would be promoted to sergeant in the marching band by his senior year. Philip would develop an interest in writing at Staunton, showing great aptitude with words at just 17. He would eventually submit 2 short stories to school literary magazine The Scimitar: The Fight, a story about a kindergartner facing his bully, and White Milk to Red Wine.
The silence hung over the deserted highway like a fog. As far as the eye could see, there was nothing but emptiness. In the middle of the road sat a milk-white rabbit, curled up into a comfortable position, its huge brown eyes staring into the emptiness. Far off in the distance, a faint sound which resembled thunder became audible. The sound increased in volume until it was almost deafening. With the sound came a flood of light which illuminated the emptiness. This sudden explosion of noise and light paralyzed the rabbit with terror, and a circular strip of hard rubber snuffed out the life of this small creature in the same manner as a candle is extinguished. The furry coat was no longer milk-white, but wine-red, and his 2 eyes stared blankly into the night. The 4-wheeled assassin was loaded with a jubilant crowd of college students. The speedometer had reached the 100 mark and was still climbing. A mile behind this wonderful modern convenience was another automobile, filled with an equally jubilant crowd belonging to a rival college. They were steadily gaining on the car ahead. Their liquor-soaked brains were confident of overtaking and beating the leaders to the finish line, which was only 7 miles away. The minutes flew by, and soon there was only half a mile to go. The driver in the lead, realizing that victory was in his grasp, was delirious with joy. His mind wandered into the future as he pictured the glory that was to be his. The picture was destroyed as a road sign appeared straight in front of him, and he realized that his car was sliding off the road. In a futile, drunken effort, he swung the steering wheel in the opposite direction with all his might. The wheels screamed in agony, and the car was thrown into a rolling motion with terrific force. The twisted heap lay in the middle of the road, and the roar of the motor was replaced by the moans of the injured. The last sight that was witnessed by the occupants was the 2 headlights of their opponents rapidly descending down upon them. The silence returned to the deserted highway, and the rabbit continued to stare blindly into the emptiness of the night.
It was also at Staunton that Philip began to devote more time to his physical appearance. The once scrawny teen began lifting weights, an exercise which would continue into his adulthood. He would then ditch his brow-line glasses for contact lenses, and ditch the name Philip for the cooler-sounding Phil. Already looking like a new man, Phil was yet unsatisfied. There was one final step to his metamorphosis. Thanks to persuasion from Phil and his sister Sunny, Gertrude agreed to let Phil have a nose job. Groggy from anesthesia, but laughing through the bruises and the bandages, Phil said to Gertrude,
"It doesn't hurt, Ma. You know why? I'm gonna be a movie star."
On June 3rd, 1958, Phil graduated from Staunton Military Academy. Under his senior photo, his yearbook noted music was one of his chief interests, liked to write, won a prize with a short story for The Scimitar, sciences were his least liked subjects, wants to attend college, but undecided about which one. Phil must have soon made up his mind, because ultimately he would attend Ohio State University in Columbus. However, that uncertainty would transfer to his studies, as he spent an aimless first year at Ohio State with no idea what to major in. When this aimlessness continued into his second year, Phil decided to take some time off. Much to his mother's horror, Phil traveled down to Florida in a half-baked attempt to strike it out on his own. He would soon learn that this was a lot harder than it looked in the movies. Not long after his arrival, Phil was half-starved and sleeping on the beach, unable to afford a motel room. He was then arrested for vagrancy and spent 15 days in a Miami jail. Allowed to listen to the radio, soothed by his old favorites like Johnny Cash, it was here, in jail, where Phil would co-write his first song with a fellow prisoner, entitled 3 Dreams. Unfortunately, only the title has survived. Upon release from jail, Phil tried again to support himself, until May, where he was arrested, again, this time for possession of alcohol. Relenting, but happy to have some life experience, Phil took what he'd learned in stride and decided to return to Ohio State. Not long after his return to Ohio, Phil needed a new roommate. His current roommate had grown pretty tired of Phil's record player, which dispensed rock and roll and country at all hours and at all volumes. One day, classmate Jim Glover was passing by Phil's room and heard the music. Lucky for Phil, Jim didn't mind the record player, and Jim also needed a new roommate. Happy to find a fellow music lover, Jim was eager to introduce Phil to some of his own favorites, Woody Guthrie, the Weavers, the Kingston Trio. Phil was ravenous for this new genre of folk, which sometimes had a more political edge than his country records. The two became fast friends, and soon Phil was spending time at Jim's parents' house. Now acquainted with Jim's father, a socialist, Phil would start to engage in discussion and debate with the two men. Consumed with subjects such as unions, the civil rights movement, Castro's Cuban Revolution, Phil wanted to learn more, his young mind devouring enough political literature for several lifetimes. Phil wasn't shy about expressing his views, and would write a letter to the editor of school paper The Lantern defending Castro. Picking up momentum, he would make several more appearances in The Lantern, mostly covering music, as well as humor magazine The Sundial. It was here that Phil landed on journalism as his major. His activism was not free of consequences, however, and Phil was denied the coveted editor position for The Lantern. Fueled by spite, Phil would start his own paper, The Word, giving himself total creative freedom. Meanwhile, Phil was looking to play something without a mouthpiece, something that would work in tandem with his unique tenor vocals. In short, he needed a guitar. The 1960 election was coming up, and knowing how desperate Phil was, Jim bet his guitar on Nixon. Phil had $50 on Kennedy, a man for whom his admiration would only grow. Come November, Phil found himself one guitar richer. Jim, one guitar poorer, began teaching Phil his first chords. Not long after, Phil would write his first topical song, Ballad of the Cuban Invasion.
They were told when they arrived they'd be helped by Castro's men, but they found out those who survived, the CIA was wrong again.
His second topical song, Freedom Riders, would soon follow.
Freedom Riders, roll along. Freedom Riders, won't be long, won't be long. They boarded a bus in Washington, D.C. to enter a state half slave and half free. The wheels hummed a song and they sang along, the song of liberty. It's the song of liberty. Freedom riders.
With burgeoning confidence in their musical prowess, the boys started a duo, with Jim on banjo and Phil on guitar. First calling themselves the Singing Socialists, then later settling on the Sundowners, the duo was soon playing open mics at local clubs. Unfortunately, following a spat over Phil's adamance for constant rigorous rehearsal, Phil walked out and Jim showed up to their first paid gig, minus a Sundowner. Jim would then drop out and leave for New York, for folk mecca Greenwich Village, while Phil worked on his solo act back in Ohio. During the summer of '61, Phil would spend some time in Cleveland, playing local clubs and opening for the Smothers Brothers and Judy Henske. Here, he would meet and collaborate with folk singer and proficient guitarist Bob Gibson, who would have immense influence on Phil's own guitar playing, his melodies appearing on songs such as One More Parade,
Called One More Parade.
and That's the Way It's Gonna Be.
Even though you say, reach the end of my road, though you say my tides are all running low, it's been so long since I tried to frown, that old man trouble will never get me down. It's all that easy when you know where you're bound. That's the way it's gonna be. Wait and see. Just you wait and see.
Phil continued on to his senior year at Ohio State, but it was clear to him that his life was headed in a different direction. So he dropped out in the last quarter and followed his friend Jim Glover to Greenwich Village to become a folk singer. 21-year-old Phil Oakes arrived in New York in autumn of 1962 and would soon be performing in basket houses such as the Gaslight, clubs where baskets or hats would be passed around to collect money for the performers after each number. Phil would then reach out to local folk music magazine Broadside, a tiny publication run by husband and wife Gordon Freeson and Sis Cunningham. Broadside would print news clippings and music of the day. This is also where Phil would begin recording, on the couple's ancient reel-to-reel machine in their apartment/office. He was writing songs faster than Sis and Gordon could print and record them, taking inspiration from the newspapers of the day. Even little-known fellow folk singer Bobby Dylan couldn't keep up with Phil. Having nowhere to stay upon his arrival to town, Phil of course looked up his old friend Jim Glover, who by this point was living with his girlfriend and musical partner Jean Ray. They had been performing professionally as duo Jim and Jean. Phil lived at the couple's tiny apartment for a while until Jean, not too pleased with being a third wheel in her own relationship, became determined to find a new dwelling for the often sloppy Phil. Luckily, Jean had a friend, Alice Skinner, a cute single girl with her own apartment. Still awkward around girls, a serious relationship was foreign to Phil. But soon, the two would warm up to each other, and, more importantly, Phil Oakes would no longer be crashing on Jim and Jean's couch. Things were on the up and up for Phil. A girlfriend, an apartment, a promising career, until Sonny called to break the news that their father had died of a cerebral hemorrhage, and that the funeral would be in New York. Never very close with his father, Phil didn't see the point in attending.
Why do I have to be there? What's the difference if I'm there or not?
Phil, Sonny said, this is your father. Regardless of the feelings you have or don't have, you must be at the funeral, and it's tomorrow, so get your ass out here. And get his ass out there he would. After burying his father, Ever-tactful Phil broke the tension in the limousine to tell Gertrude that his girlfriend Alice was pregnant and that he was going to marry her. It wasn't as if Gertrude could do anything to prevent the union. What was done could not be undone. So, Phil Oakes and Alice Skinner were married on May 16, 1963, in a modest ceremony at City Hall. The couple were scolded by the justice for snickering through the event. Though they explained away the laughter as nerves, the two were likely well aware of the absurdity of this union. Thrown in with this whirlwind of earth-shattering events was Phil's television debut on New York Illustrated and an invitation to the 1963 Newport Folk Festival that July. Phil was overjoyed, seeing this as the pivotal event that would cause his career to take off. However, on the way to Rhode Island for the festival, Phil was stricken with several ailments, including extreme anxiety and a headache that left him sprawled across the car's back seat in tears. Phil's arrival in Newport was marked by 2 separate hospital visits, where he would have a spinal tap which left him in further agony. Refusing to let a little excruciating pain hold the rising star back, Phil went on anyway, against doctor's orders, and performed Too Many Martyrs and Talking Birmingham Jam, the cheers from the crowd giving him strength. Having poured all his energy into this performance, Phil trundled off stage and collapsed at the roots of a nearby tree. Not 2 months following Newport, Phil became a father when Alice gave birth to their daughter, Megan Lee Oakes. Surely this would be the last of so many big events during such a roller coaster of a year. Right? November 22nd, 1963. Phil joins the country in paralyzed terror as the news of John F. Kennedy's assassination is delivered through his television set. He had lost another father. Sitting at the kitchen table, his face flat on its surface, his body shaking with sobs and far too many complicated emotions, Phil tells his wife,
"I think I'm gonna die tonight."
Alice would later say that Phil couldn't breathe for weeks after the news. Phil would pour his grief into a eulogy for Kennedy. That Was the President, which would appear on his second album. Never one to abandon his principles, however, Phil refused to remove songs from his repertoire that were critical of the slain president, such as Talking Cuban Crisis and Talking Vietnam, despite vehement protests from Gaslight manager Sam Hood. By now, Phil had become a regular fixture at the Gaslight and other village hotspots like Gertie's Folk City, amassing many folky friends in the process, like Eric Anderson, Dave Van Ronk, David Blue, Tom Paxton, and some guy named Bob. This crew would spend countless hours at Phil and Alice's Bleecker Street apartment, sharing their writing with each other, drinking, and playing cards. Phil's quirks were proudly embraced by the rowdy bunch, and one particular incident still has the village chuckling. One evening, before a gig at the Gaslight, Phil accidentally swallowed a contact lens. So he did what any reasonable person would do and proceeded to stick a finger down his throat, vomit, fish out the lens, clean it off, and go about business as usual. The show must go on. Meanwhile, Phil's music and stage presence were finally causing record labels to take notice. Paul Rothchild, a talent scout from Elektra Records, caught a performance at the Gaslight and was impressed by the young musician's ability to draw a variety of emotions from his audience, from reverence to laughter to tears, all in one set. Phil's unbridled confidence and certainty that he would be the next big thing came off as naive and brash to Rothchild, but he couldn't deny the kid had talent. So, Phil's tireless courtship with New York's record labels would end with him signing on with Elektra, where he would begin work on his first studio album. Well, technically his second studio album, but I'll let you Google Camp Favorites. With over 60 songs in his repertoire by now, the hardest part was figuring out which ones belonged on the album. Please join me and a small circle of friends as we discuss the songs that made the cut for All the News That's Fit to Sing.
Always the old to lead us to the war. It's always the young to fall. Now look at all we wanted to savor and to done. Tell me, is it worth it all?
Hello everyone, welcome. So I decided to have you guys on because I wanted to hear some other perspectives on this music, and I didn't want to posture myself as the authority on the music because people have different opinions and different perspectives than me, and I feel like it's important for people to hear that. I also want to kind of illustrate how far Phil's legacy reaches, because we're all pretty young. We all did not exist in Phil's lifetime. And I want to show the world that I'm not the only one. Let's kind of go around and introduce ourselves with your, name, age, pronouns, something cool about yourself, or something you'd like to share. This is like the icebreakers in high school.
I love icebreakers.
Give me 2 truths and a lie. I'll start. I am your host. I am Tori Nelson. I am 24 years old, and my pronouns are they, them, and she, her. And I'm your host. That's it. There's nothing cool about me.
I am Mackenzie Solers. I am 20 years old. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm doing this. I'm really excited. I've always wanted to do a podcast because I have so much useless information just living in my brain constantly that annoys everybody that I know and love. And
Hell yeah.
It's fun to use that information for something productive. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, something other than flexing on Jeopardy.
Literally.
I'm Elizabeth. I'm 19. She, her pronouns. And I just really love Phil.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Sally. I'm 29. I live in Tennessee, and I first heard of Phil through radical left-wing groups on social media, like in, let's see, I want to say like 2009, 2010, something like that. And yeah.
Welcome,
everybody.
Sorry.
Yay.
Yeah. It's so nice to be acquainted with everyone. We've only spoken through text before now, and this is really, this is exciting.
It's a moment.
You all have lovely voices.
Yes, I agree. Nobody's voice is annoying, which I was worried about.
Thank
I'll just say
you.
it. If somebody's voice is annoying, then this would be fun. So cheers to that.
So, how acquainted are we all with this album?
I'm pretty acquainted.
I would say I'm very acquainted with this one, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I've listened to it. I mean, definitely not as acquainted as probably like his later stuff, but I've listened to it.
It's not like one of my personal favorites, but I appreciate like its value. I think it's a really strong like breakout album for its topical material, especially.
Absolutely. I'm relatively acquainted with it. I think less so the more newspaper article songs than others, but definitely, you know, One More Parade, Power and the Glory, The Bells is another favorite. What's That I Hear is a frequent player for me. But this one I didn't really put much thought to until recently.
Yeah.
How does this album kind of rank for everyone? You know, where does it lie? Is it a favorite? Is it up there? Is it not quite your favorite?
I wouldn't say it's one of my personal favorites, though I do still really like it. There's not a Phil album I dislike. But I think personally for me, music is all about like personal connection. That's just like automatically how I do it, and I feel like it's a little bit harder to form like a personal emotional connection with this album just because of its more topical nature.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel kind of the same way. It definitely ranks toward the bottom for me. But like Beth said, it's definitely, there's not a Phil album that I don't really enjoy. But it doesn't really feel as much like an album, more of like just a compilation of really good songs that I enjoy, you know, that are just like a comprehensive album with like a start and a finish and like an aesthetic to it. So it doesn't feel as much like an album to me.
I was gonna say, see, I think for me that all the news actually ranks pretty high. I don't think it's my number one, but uh, what my number one fluctuates like all the time. I listen to Phil a lot, and depending on what mood I'm in, really is what I'll tell you if you ask me what my favorite album is, I guess. But all the news has pretty consistently been one of my favorites, and I think that's because as I said in my introduction, I was originally drawn to Phil Oakes through because of his radical left wing politics, and I think it was Judy Henske in the documentary Therefore But for
Yeah.
Fortune, where she said that the reason Phil never got famous is because his songs were too involved. And I can see that for most people, but I think for myself, just being a huge history nerd, like that's why I love Phil. I could listen to him rant about like all these obscure, like issues of the day, just endlessly. Just always really appreciated how he, kept the memory of those people and those events alive for future generations, I guess.
And I think it was also Judy in the documentary who said Phil made a lot of people uncomfortable, and I definitely agree, especially with this album. Like like strong like opinions that he represents. I think it made it put off a lot of people.
Yeah, because I know that I have seen that complaint. Is just that it just felt like blatant like political propaganda, and Phil made that joke himself, in live sets. And but I guess for me that's just the reason that I like it.
Sorry, even though like this album isn't one of my personal favorites, like it's genuinely like impossible for me to pick a favorite song like off this album. Like the material is just so strong and like so just like I don't even know how to describe it. Like it's just so like to the point. Like he doesn't like mess around. He just gets straight to what he wants to say.
Yeah, this bit was hard for me because I feel like everything stands out. Like it's just hard to say. Well, I think like more relevant.
Yes, absolutely, and I think that's why ultimately, it does float around like my number one spot, just because every song is so powerful and like so filled with emotion. It's just really hard to settle on what the best song of the album is.
Just the power behind the power behind the entire album, even though maybe it is a little naive. Just you can feel the passion, and it makes you believe that he
right. And I also think it just has a very strong opening. I love that he put One More Parade at the beginning. It just opens up with that drum tapping. It kind of sets the tone for like the whole album.
Definitely.
So kind of the reason why it kind of doesn't feel like a whole piece on its own, like Phil was a great songwriter, of course, like we wouldn't be talking about him if he wasn't, but he had already had 30 or 40 songs printed in broadside at the time, and he had 60 written, and out of those 60 they picked the strongest ones.
I remember like the famous like stories of Phil like staying up all night to like write new songs, and I think it was Sonny who even said when he kept playing like the chords for Power and Glory over and over and over again, and it annoyed the hell out of her, and he was just like, I'm writing the best song there ever was, and he was just like so sure and confident in himself, which he had every right to be.
Oh yeah, that's an amazing song too.
Yeah, for sure, one of his strongest ones.
Come on and take a walk with me through this green and growing land. Walk through the meadows and the mountains and the sand. Walk through the valleys and the rivers and the plains. Walk through the sun and walk through the rain. Here's a land full of power and glory, beauty that words cannot recall. All her power shall rest on the strength of her freedom. Glory shall rest on us all.
I think for sure it's in the same vein as like This Land Is Your Land. I think it has like a lot of the same like patriotic sentiments, but not like necessarily in like the I think like what makes Phil like patriotic is the fact that he loved his country in the sense that he like wanted it to be better. Like he didn't just accept it for what it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Patriotism,
Like,
but not
to
nationalism.
yeah,
Yeah.
like to call back to the documentary, you know, I think there's a part like near the very beginning where Christopher Hitchens is talking about how it was kind of popular among the left and around that time, you know, in the early 60s to still be very pro-American, but also like from a left-wing stance, like that, like stuff like, you know, Vietnam like broke my American heart, I think is what he said, you know. So I think Phil definitely started out like that. I think that his first two albums especially showed like a very strong sense of, you know, that things can be better and there can be a better way, as to where his later political work is much more nihilistic.
And going off of also what Christopher Hitchens said, he brought up the fact of like that like Phil's generation's like iconography with like John Wayne and like, you know, that like Western cowboy, like the hero who was gonna save the world. And I think like that's like really what like fueled this album. Like you can see that like influence, like
100%.
influence.
I mean, he was the protagonist in his own movie. So,
yeah,
you know.
He was the main character for sure.
So, what songs kind of stand out for you guys the most?
Oh, this is such a loaded question. It's so hard.
Yeah, it really is.
Because truthfully, like I even like wrote down all of the ones that stood out to me, and it's literally like half the album.
It was really hard. So when I was trying to do this, where I was just going through all the songs, taking notes, and like, oh, this is how I feel about this song, and it's like even the ones that like don't kick around in my shuffle very much, or like when I like the ones that I tend to skip. As I was listening to the album all the way through, I was finding myself just like singing and humming to every single friggin' song.
Yeah. And I find that happens to me a lot too, you know, like there'll be certain ones that I skip and then I'll just forget about them and then hear them and like fall in love with them again, basically.
That's
but
like
I think
a really good topical song. Like that just shows that he was really serving the purpose of those songs. Like he did that justice, you know, because it's
exactly.
Oh,
right.
Yeah, like I'm singing along and I don't even realize that I'm singing along, you know?
Yeah.
I think I'm really partial to Lou Marsh.
On the streets of New York City, when the hour was getting late, there were young men armed with knives and guns, young men armed with hate, and Lou Marsh stepped between them and died there in his tracks. For one man is no army when a city turns its back. And now
just because I think that one of the things that made Phil such a great songwriter was just his sense of empathy, you know, in this very empathetic headspace with people. And so I think that really showed through in the lyrics to that one specifically. Like he's singing about someone who, I mean, Lou Marsh in real life was a New York social worker. He could have been someone that Phil was friends with. He likely was. So that, and I think Celia also stands out.
Yes, I was just about to say, I think one thing that I don't know if I've ever really seen anybody else do is like the way he made Celia like a love song. It's almost like a love letter.
I wake each morning and I watch the sun arise. Wonder if my Celia sleeps. Wonder if she cries. If hate must be my prison lock, love must be the key. Oh, when will Celia come to me?
And I haven't, like, I just think that, like, that has always, like, just, I mean, stuck in the back of my mind. I've never seen another song like that, truthfully.
Yeah, I think
beautiful.
One of the things that sticks out about Celia to me is that, you know, like we've already discussed, all the news is very fire and brimstone, like politically charged. But a lot of Phil's, you know, a lot of his more famous work, I guess you might say, is his more poetic stuff. You know, it's still political, but less political. Like some of his later work, like Pleasures of the Harbor, you know. And I think that Celia was maybe like his first, even though it's like semi-political undertones, I think it's his first to dabble into like just like, you know, the more poetic side of his music, other than the bells, of course.
Yeah, for sure.
I had a note on Lou Marsh because Sally, you brought up his empathy, and you know he had empathy for Lou Marsh, but he also had empathy for the gang that killed him. And
yes, absolutely.
the line "Shed a tear on poverty, tombstone of us all" is just like it perfectly kind of ties it up.
That like jumped out at me as I was listening to the album. That line specifically, and it never really had before, but listening to it like, you know, around the house, like leading up to this, that line like kept jumping out at me. And just...
Yeah, to build up on what you were saying, you know, about how he had empathy for the gang itself, that's always struck me, you know, in the opening line, he says, there are young men armed with knives and guns, young men armed with hate. And I just think that it's interesting that, you know, like, even though Lou Marsh was obviously somebody he greatly sympathized with and felt empathy for, he didn't, you know, use a word like monsters or thugs or something like you might expect today. You know, he portrayed them as just young men filled with hate, which was, you know, his empathy on that showing through really strongly, I think.
I think one thing that always set Phil apart is the fact that like he understood like where like that gang was like coming from in a sense, and just like generally like he always like understood the other side. Like he knew what they did was a bad thing, but he also like recognized like the like failings of the government that put them in that situation, like
yes,
poverty and such.
Completely.
So yeah, I love Lou Marsh, and it's also really cool that like even his most specific topical songs always at least have one line that could be applied to something today, or just an issue that's still prevalent, which is really that's just amazing to me, and also a little sad. But you know, we're always talking about how it's sad how so much of his music is still relevant, but you know, even the most specific stories have something poignant to them, which
that's
is
very
really
true.
cool.
And I think it was in actually Susie Rotolo's, I don't know if I said her last name right, sorry, but in her memoir, she had a little like section about Phil, and she was talking about how his topical songs had an expiration date, and how that was kind of like kind of unfortunate for him, which I actually disagree. I think all topical songs, even though that specific situation, like we're not fresh off the heels of the JFK assassination, but I think the sentiments like are what like still apply to today.
And they
like the general message is still relevant.
History is like so cyclical.
Yeah, it repeats itself.
Yeah. And I think
absolutely.
That's the reason for this show.
Yeah, for real.
Because Phil Oakes is still necessary today.
Yeah.
We still need him.
And like even some of his songs, like, you know, like back to Lou Marsh, or, you know, Billy Saul, the fact that he wrote songs about these topics ensured that there, you know, will be no expiration date for the subject matter. You know, like, I had no idea who Billy Saul was. I mean, there's been a few Phil songs, even as a history nerd, there's been a few Phil songs where I've decided to be like, all right, I'm gonna have to Google what the hell he's talking about. I don't know
same,
what this is.
For sure,
and,
same here.
But now, because of his, but even if I didn't Google it, you know, I feel like that his songs are good representations of like the stories of those people. So that was pretty much all I was saying.
I think we all can share the same like experience to some extent, that Phil like also kind of like radicalized us just a little bit further, you know, to some degree.
Yeah, totally.
That's definitely true of me. Some people find him, you know, after they're already radical, but it was the opposite for me, because I was born listening to him.
I really like the point Sally brought up about like Googling things that he's talking about, because naturally I'm a very curious person. I love history, but like if there's ever like a word, like even just a word or like an event that he mentions, like I will straight away go look it up, and I've learned like so much that way.
For sure.
On the point like of his music like having an expiration date or kind of being so time specific, I think it serves a different purpose now, and that like it's teaching lessons rather than like creating solidarity, which I think it did then, but now it teaches these lessons, because I'm the same way. I find myself looking things up and going, okay, what is this story about? You know, it's obviously something very important, and it's teaching me something, or like maybe confirming a feeling that I already have, but giving me a specific story to kind of confirm because I was pretty radical by the time I like came around to Phil.
Right.
But it kind of gives me these really specific stories of like, this is the reason I feel the way I feel. And it gives me a really good tool to help maybe radicalize my friends who
Yeah.
It's a good way to kind of ease people into more leftist politics, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Phil even said once, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but he said it's something like it's great to see people who disagree with your politics humming your melodies. You might call it musical brainwashing. I wrote down, like, do you have a least favorite song? Yeah, does anyone have, like, a least favorite song on the album?
Truthfully, I don't think there's a Phil song that I dislike. I mean, I know I'm biased, but I really haven't heard a song of his that I was like, I'm never going to play this again, or anything like that.
Oh,
Truthfully,
yeah.
I think All the News is a really strong album. There's not a song that I dislike.
Yeah, I think the one that I probably skip on that album the most is probably The Bells. Not that I dislike that song, and like if I'm just shuffling Phil songs randomly and it comes up, I'll listen to it. But if I'm like specifically in the mood for like the fire and brimstone political content of All the News, like The Bells doesn't really fit in there, you know?
Yeah,
So I'll usually skip it.
Yeah, I love The Bells.
Also,
I actually wrote I wrote in my notes, this song slaps.
It does. It totally does.
Hear the sledges with the bells, silver bells. What a world of merriment their melody foretells. How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle in the icy air of night. All the heavens seem to twinkle with a crystalline delight. Keeping time with a...
But I love the... It just sounds like...
Yeah.
It sounds like a Christmas song, almost. And
It does.
I'm not a very, like, Christmassy kind of person, but it's one of those that just, like, gives me that, like, that warm and fuzzy feeling. And it's like, and the guitar sounds like... It invokes bells imagery. It's almost like bells, actual bells.
well, while we're on the topic of the song, I think Phil had to have been like one of the first people to kind of like to put like music to a poem, like in that sense, like on an album. Like he wasn't like the first, but I think like it was one of the first like really notable ones.
Yeah, for sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but
It really kind of illustrates his musical ability. Because he's usually kind of heralded for his lyrical, his songwriting, but his melodies are fantastic, and they're just like so earwormy.
Yeah, that's exactly the note that I wrote for like my impactful, like most impactful moment is The Bells, because I'm like, you know, this is a great like topical album, but then just slapped in the middle of it, he's like, hold up, I can really do this guitar too. Let me just hit y'all with that real quick. And I love that, you know, it just, because I agree, we all like spend so much time unpacking the lyrics and the meaning and the motivation, but I don't think we all talk about what an actual incredible musician he was.
Oh yeah, and
For sure.
you know that Bob Gibson influence is really really in there.
But yeah, all the Bob Gibson stuff I really enjoy. Like those always stick out to me. That influence is really powerful, I think, and obviously shaped.
They kind of have this. They have this kind of darkness to them that I really like. I want to say Dave Van Ronk said Gibson was the seminal influence on Phil's guitar playing, and it is really obvious in One More Parade. I love, like, One More Parade goes so hard.
It does.
That bass line, like, that is a hell of a start to an album.
Up, 2, 3, 4, marching down the street, rolling of the drums and the tramping of the feet. General salutes and the mothers waving we. Here comes the big parade. Don't be afraid, price is paid. One more parade. So young so strong, so ready for the war, so willing to go and die upon a foreign
It's such a
shore.
like strong start, like with the like drums sounding like footsteps, like marching and everything like that. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just feels like a charge. Like,
Yes. Kind of like wakes you up almost, like brings it to your attention.
yeah.
Oh yeah. So I guess my personal least favorite song on the album, and just one that I don't really listen to very much, is Automation Song.
Agreed.
Oh, I lay down your railroads every mile of track, with the muscles on my arm and the sweat upon my back. And now the trains are rolling, they roll to every shore. You tell me that my job is through, there ain't no work no more.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before. I remember you said that.
Yeah, it's funny because I
Probably.
also agree. I think Automation Song is like one of those that I almost never listen to. It's not that I dislike it, but it's
Yeah.
also like the one that the melody gets stuck in my head the most for some reason. Like that early, like that opening guitar, picking. It just I always find that in my head, just on a repeat.
When I was taking notes, just on a listen through of the album, the first thing I wrote was, "Don't know this one that well," and then the next note is, "I started whistling." It's like it's still.
Yeah.
So we were talking about like the expiration date. That's probably one of the songs that more has an expiration date.
I think like Automation is still a worry, but in a much different sense than it was.
It's more like robots.
Yeah.
Like, I'm worried about robots.
I think one of the things that gets lost in translation there too is that there was the connotation of, large corporations and stuff using automation as a political tool to union bust. So, and because, Phil was obviously a big pro-union guy, as all the old folk singers were, I think that was more his rallying cry, was that, not necessarily that automation itself was bad.
Sympathizing with the worker.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
yes.
Are we all kind of like on board with Automation Song being
I think
maybe
so,
the
yeah.
weakest?
Automation Song.
Maybe in like the bottom I'd place the talking songs, but those are so good too.
Yeah.
I love the talking songs. Talking
Human
Vietnam Blues.
Crisis.
Man.
They're just so
I think,
I
funny.
love his talking songs.
That really showcases like his satire abilities.
Yes,
I
actually
they're funny. Like they're really fun to listen to, especially heavy, like Too Many Martyrs is so heavy. One More Parade is so heavy. And like at Newport when he's like, there's always like, I don't have the exact quote, but when there's tragedy, there's always just a little bit of the absurd in it. And I think those songs are good because they showed the absurdity of it all.
He was so good at like lampooning serious subjects and still getting people to like laugh at them because it like you said like you said, in times of tragedy there's always something of the ridiculous. So there's always something you can laugh about, and he does that very well, just to kind of get people on board with him and show that he's not just like some preachy, stuffy protest singer.
Yeah, definitely.
I actually wrote down that he has like a great use of like humor to get his point across a lot of the time, which I think is like one of his like greatest strengths.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I love his sense of humor too.
Yes, absolutely.
It's really hard to like compartmentalize his life because it's just like this one big Shakespearean tale.
Yeah, it's like everything like leads off to like another thing. Like it's hard to just like cut it off at a certain point because everything like leads into something else. I don't know how to explain that. But...
Yeah.
This album really does that more so than any other one because you can see like each song kind of has like a descendant later on in his career. Like the Thresher.
Yeah, I like that.
That's such a good point.
You can like listen to his later stuff and like compare it to this first album. They all have something that he kind of expanded on, and it became more of like an introspective thing later on in his career rather than just like the talking journalist, vibe that this album.
Right.
Yeah, I never thought about it like that before.
I always say, like, suck it, the Beatles. Phil wrote 2 songs about submarines.
Yeah.
In all the news, it's like he's telling you the story, he's reading you the paper, in an entertaining and an interesting way. But in later albums, there's more of a personal and more poetic connection.
The Thresher is the perfect example because this first story is so objective, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like
But then
progression that really synthesizes like the progression of his songwriting from being from this outside point of view to how it affected him.
And I guess while we're on the topic of the Thresher, it's a good point to bring up that Phil has a lot of like ocean and sea and like sailor imagery in his songs.
Yeah.
And once somebody pointed that out, like it's all I can notice now. Like he has a lot of that imagery in his songs. And I think like to a degree kind of thought as like the ocean and the sea and like sailing and stuff like that, like as an escape almost. In movies, like a lot of like the sea is like almost an escape. Like you travel and go places and you kind of like get away from like your troubles for a second. And I think like the sea is like that imagery for a lot of people. It's like traveling and going and like experiencing new things. And I think maybe that's part of the reason why. I think it was maybe subconscious for him. I don't think he meant to kind of bring that up so much in his songs, but that's always like how I viewed it.
He definitely has always had like this romantic view of the world, and I think the ocean is just so romantic and so cinematic no matter what, and that was just him, just dramatic, cinematic, focused on the romance of the world, even the ugly stuff.
So are there any lyrics? We already talked about this a little bit, it just kind of came up, but are there any particular lyrics or lines from songs that stand out to anyone?
My first one was from One More Parade when he said, "Few years ago, their guns were only toys." And I think like that like instantly stuck out to me, and that's always been in my mind. It's like how the soldiers were kids just a few years ago, now they're going to kill. Like how they like played with toy guns and then made that progression to like real guns.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's constantly bringing up that they were kids and calling them boys, not calling them men. Yeah, is another thing, and war's a game is another. Making this relevant. So the Army National Guard or whatever having their own Twitch channel, and like basically recruiting kids through this thing. I was thinking, a few years ago their guns were only toys. Quick little sidebar, Sally's dropped out now, so it's just the 3 of us for the rest of the call.
One thing also, a thought I was trying to hold is when we were talking about the first, or that one line, a few years ago, their guns were only toys, and you said that, like, Phil, like, made a point to, like, call them, like, boys and, like, not men and stuff. And I think, like, in a sense, a lot of them were still children. I mean, these are, like, 18-year-olds, like, that's, I mean, you're legally an adult, but you're still a kid at that point, like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I'm only 19 and I still feel like a kid. I don't feel like a real adult. Yeah. And these people were being, like, taken away from their homes and shipped off to a place. And a lot of these kids were, like, poor, disadvantaged people.
Actually, the youngest soldier to die in Vietnam is from my hometown. He was 15.
Oh my god.
Oh my goodness.
Jesus.
From Goldsboro. I can't remember his name. We have like a plaque dedicated to him. It's like really hidden. Like it's not a big deal. I think it should be a bigger deal because he was 15 years old, and that's like terrifying to think about. Like me as a 16-year-old or 15-year-old going to another country, that alone is terrifying. But to do something so heavy and carry that burden, and then to not come home, that's insane. But yeah, he's from my hometown. That's our claim to fame.
Yeah. So I wondered a little bit with like One More Parade how much from Staunton stuck with Phil. So I grabbed the my issue of Avant-Garde here, where he talks about Staunton. He says, "I liked it fine there," he said complacently. "Maybe it's a little scary in retrospect, but at the time I had no thoughts about anything. My main interests were weightlifting and going to the racetrack playing the horses."
I remember he had the Mr. Universe nickname.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
It's so, like, unsettling to imagine, like, a muscular Phil. Like I can't imagine like a buff Phil. Like that's so unsettling.
Swole Oaks.
Oh my goodness.
I hate that. Oh no. You might say I was involved in providing a hood exterior for my soft middle class inner being. In addition, he dug a lot of country music and played in the school's marching band, clarinet, saxophone, cymbals, and drums. I'm still a big John Philip Sousa fan. There's always been a big Marshall influence in my songs. It puzzles people until they figure it out. The military thing runs deep with Oakes. He recalls being quite impressed with Senator Barry Goldwater when the latter spoke at his class's graduation. This was 1957. He looked so military, and he admits to being, even now, an avid fan of war movies of the John Wayne genre. I guess I still romanticize the military, he said, only now in reverse. In this light, certain songs of his, like I Ain't Marchin' Anymore, take on a personal significance.
I always wondered if he resented his time there.
That's what I wonder too. I feel like he said, he thinks it might be a little scary in retrospect, but he didn't mind being there when he was there. There might be like some kind of subconscious link to his military school days in songs like One More Parade, or maybe like, I Ain't Marching Anymore, because he probably literally marched when he was in school.
I am literally not marching anymore.
I got done with that in 1957.
Yeah. It was like I graduated.
Or 1958.
He's like, everybody like mistook the song. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, he's like, no, I just literally mean that I was done. Like I was done with school. Like that's it.
Yeah. Well, and then ROTC was mandatory at Ohio State, and that was one of the first things that Phil rallied against.
I was gonna say on like for the impactful lyrical musical moments. We already talked about the bells a little bit, but just like musically, man, like I said, like just having that like kind of right there. I don't know, it just feels very. I just feel like it's a moment in the album. It's kind of like it makes you stop and go, "What? Like, let me start that over." To really listen to it.
It's a little intermission. It's a little bit of a relief, and then it's the last song on side one.
What's the first song on the second side?
The first song on the second side is Automation Song. So
like why, it's not an album, because that's not a good second side starter,
Well, it's of a bold reporter, a story I will tell. He went down to the Cuban land, the nearest place to hell. He'd been there many times before, but now the law does say the only way to Cuba is with the CIA. William Worthy isn't worthy to enter our door. Went down to Cuba, he's not American anymore. But somehow it is strange to hear the State Department say you are living in the free world you must stay.
But in Ballad of William Worthy, when he says the whole world is off limits, visit Disneyland this year, that's like one of my like all-time like it's such a simple lyric, but it's one of my all-time like favorite Phil lyrics. Like just to call back to what I said earlier, like his use of humor to get the point across is like one of his greatest strengths. And I think he was like trying to say it, like reiterating that like the government like wanted you to stay in that shelter like of America, and Disneyland, more now than it was then, is like such a big like corporation and such a symbol of capitalism. I think like the lyric has
and such an American symbol too.
Yes, absolutely.
But oh my god, so yeah, someone tweeted, I don't remember who, but like when Disneyland was opening during COVID, someone retweeted and captioned it, "The whole world is off limits. Visit Disneyland this year."
Oh man,
very good. I really like the line in that. Why do you waste his time to see a dictator's reign when he could have seen democracy by traveling on the space?
That's man. Great.
That's like,
I love that song. That song is like, it's so near and dear.
It's another great like example of his satirical abilities.
Yes, but also like, and he like brought so much attention to that case as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. While we're on William Worthy, both Celia and William Worthy, I believe, were put on Broadside Ballads. It was released before All the News That's Fit to Sing, so William Worthy was his first recorded song. or his first, I guess, professionally recorded song.
Yeah.
Hi, just a quick editor's note. At this point, I read a passage from Death of a Rebel by Mark Elliott. So, okay, shortly before the Broadside Ballads album was released, Phil received a phone call from William Worthy and immediately invited him to the apartment for dinner. Worthy accepted the offer. After dinner, they all went to the Gaslight to watch Phil perform. Before doing the song, Phil introduced Worthy to the crowd, which greeted him with a standing ovation. A few days later, Phil received this letter. Dear Phil Oakes, last night I certainly enjoyed hearing your ballad on my passport case. Dick Gregory has told me that he plans to start cracking jokes about the case on his circuit. So perhaps between Oakes and Gregory, the whole sorry business can be laughed out of court. This quick note is written on the run. My regards to your wife. Cordially, William Worthy.
Aww.
A few months later, Worthy's conviction was overturned in the U.S. Court of Appeals. As presented by William Kunstler... Kunstler? Oh, okay. Kunstler. I'm not...
What an unfortunate last
I am not responsible for how that name is said, because Kunstler? I don't know. Okay. Worthy's defense successfully established that in the United States it was not a crime to come home.
Go Phil.
I guess, maybe just kind of going down the line. The Thresher.
And they marveled at her speed, and they marveled at her depth. They marveled at her deadly design. And they sailed to every land, and they sailed to every port, just to see what faults they could find. Then they put her on the land for 9 months to stand, and they worked on her from stem to stern. But they could never see it was their coffin to be, for the sea was waiting for their return. Yes, she'll always run silent, and she'll always run deep, though the ocean has no pity, though the waves will never weep, they'll never weep.
I hadn't really listened much to The Thresher before. I knew it, and it's really pretty, and I think it has a lovely, like, earworm chorus. I really like the line, coffin to be, it was their coffin to be. She was a death ship all along, died before she had a chance to kill. And then there's... This has a lot of good early examples of his alliteration, which is a device that he uses so much that I didn't notice until recently just how much...
I never noticed that, actually. You're right.
Things like stem to stern, deeper, deeper, deeper and deeper and deeper they dove, deepest, darkest sand. Some early examples of his alliteration. And then ever since someone pointed that out, I'm just hearing it in all of his music, this alliteration.
It was the same thing for me with the ocean imagery. Like, it's something I never, like, put together until somebody pointed it out, and now it's, like, all I can notice.
Yeah.
So, talking Vietnam...
Sailing over to Vietnam, Southeast Asian Birmingham. Well, training is the word we use, nice word to have in case we lose. Training 1 million Vietnamese to fight for the wrong government and the American way.
I absolutely love Talking Vietnam. That's, like, one of my favorite Phil songs. I don't know, like, it's just like, so amazing. I don't know.
I like how it's, like, they tried to shoot us down, them commies never fight fair,
Yeah.
and then the very next verse is, like, the very next day we trained some more, we burned some villages down to the floor.
Yeah.
That kind of, like, hypocrisy there, and then under lock and key made damn sure they're free.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, but at the end of the song, when it's like, all the new leaders are anti-red, and then it says, like, the CIA saying, like, thank God for coincidence.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that.
I love his timing with, ruled by one family and 15,000 American troops, give or take a few. 1,000 American troops.
It's
just
so
so good. And then I regret that I have but one country to give for my life.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
his families that stay together.
Families, that's such
yeah.
that's such a good line.
Yeah.
This song is just filled with those great one-liners. I really like it because I feel like these are things that he like jokes that he made in conversation. You know, like that's what it feels like. You know, when you're just having a conversation.
I love his talking songs. Absolutely love them.
I do too. I really enjoy
They're
all
so
of them.
funny.
I think like one thing like nobody like could compete with Phil like was his humor. Like his humor was so in a league of its own. Like truly, I can't even like describe it.
It's timeless.
It really is timeless. Like listening to him, like just his sense of humor is it's very similar to like today.
So, Power and the Glory. What do we think?
I love that song.
Yeah.
I love like only as rich as the poorest of the poor, only as free as the padlock prison door. I think that's so like poetic.
Yeah, it's good. I really like that Phil always like called it his like right-wing song, and I'm like, not even right-wingers would say that. Like,
well, a right-winger did say it.
Anita Bryant,
Anita Bryant, yeah.
And didn't Phil even say like her cover wasn't bad? He said she made it like a conservative like thing.
He said her cover was his favorite.
Oh, come on, Phil.
On the strength of her freedom, her glory shall rest on us all. Yet she's only as rich as the poorest of the poor, only as free as a padlocked prison door, only as strong as our love for this land, only as tall as we stand.
He loved it.
It was her that said, like, she was, like, unsure about singing that line.
Yeah, she's only as rich as the poorest of the poor.
Yeah.
She was like, should I... are you sure this is a pro-America song or something like that? Just, like... It spoke to Phil's, again, patriotism, but not nationalism.
Yeah.
In an interview, he says that's his favorite. He likes it. Yeah, he really liked the arrangement of Anita Bryant's cover.
I think also Phil liking that cover specifically, like, really speaks to his character, how, like, he didn't automatically, like, shut somebody out because they were of the opposite, like, political beliefs.
Yeah.
And, because obviously he could have, like, been, like, absolutely, like, outraged at it and, like, made a big deal about it, but he liked it and he was honest about it.
And, he recorded, he re-recorded Power and the Glory with a fife and drum arrangement in the 70s.
Come on and take a walk with me through this green and growing land. Walk through the meadows and the mountains and the sand. Walk through the valleys and the rivers and the plains.
It's Broadside of Boston is the article or the interview that he mentions it. The only record I'm completely satisfied with is Anita Bryant singing Power and the Glory, which is a total grandiose, right-wing, huge production of Power and the Glory on a patriotic album. They took the song and they extended the scope of the song to its widest range, and they did it in a corny way and in a right-wing way, but still, artistically speaking, they did it. In my grandest dreams, if I'd ever done it, I would have done something like that, except less unashamedly patriotic than
I
they
respect
did.
that. I respect that.
Less unashamed.
We all know his command of irony is amazing. I think that's why he liked it, because even though it is a patriotic song, it's just,
the fact that it was
I
like
think
done
he
that
appreciated the irony of it.
Yeah.
I think Bound for Glory is a really beautiful song.
He's bound for a glory on his own, and now he's bound for glory. Now they sing out his praises on every distant shore, but so few remember what he was fighting for. Oh, I sing the songs and forget about the aim, He wrote them for a reason, why not sing them for the same? For now he's bound for a glory all his own, and now he's bound for glory.
I think it's
Yeah.
a beautiful tribute to Woody. I mean, he was like pretty much the whole reason for the folk revival. Like, I mean, him and Pete Seeger. I think it's a really touching ballad, really.
Something I really love about Bound for Glory is that he already talks about the dilution of Woody's messages.
Yeah.
Yes,
Because I just learned about Woody Guthrie as the guy who wrote This Land Is Your Land, and that was it.
Yeah.
I didn't even learn about him in school, like, at all.
I also wrote, good incorporations of song titles without sounding disjointed. The line, why sing the songs and forget about the aim? He wrote them for a reason, why not sing them for the same? It's so crazy how Phil's finger was on the pulse of so many things.
Yes, and
like how he could predict, or I mean, it was likely already happening. He saw it, but he pointed it out that early, right after Woody died.
In that same vein, he was also like one of the first like major figures to speak out about the Vietnam War. He I remember in the Broadside interview, he even like said that himself. Like even while Kennedy was still in office, he was already talking about the Vietnam War. People like really had no idea or weren't paying attention.
Knock on the door.
In many a time, in many a land, with many a gun in many a hand, they came by the night, they came by the day, came with their guns to take us away. With a knock on the door, knock on the door, here they come to take one more.
That's one of those songs that I don't like, that I skip a lot. Like it's one whenever it comes into my, when it pops up on people, like I never stop listening to it.
It's a heavy song, so I think that's definitely fair.
Yeah, I'm with you guys on one that I skip. And it usually doesn't matter if a song's heavy because I tend to really vibe with the heavy songs, but like it is pretty poignant. Like I wondered if any kind of recent events inspired it, or if it's just kind of about fascism in general.
I kind of take it as like a warning, like historically, this is a thing that keeps happening. Be ready for it to happen again, and I think trying like maybe historical parallels, I think that we're seeing that again, like we can.
Oh yeah.
This is definitely a song that you could keep adding verses, as time goes.
Absolutely.
And this would be a really good time to add a verse to the song.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like that.
The next thing I wrote was Ice. So and then when I was writing my impressions with this was before the Fed started picking people up off the street in Portland.
And unmarked vans.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness
gracious.
Yeah.
And lines that stood out to me were 6 million people have heard that same sound. The banners have changed, but the knock is the same.
Yes. Oh, I absolutely love that.
So,
and I think that really like ties into what Mackenzie was saying about how it's kind of like a cautionary tale about like this keeps repeating and like watch out for it to happen again. Like like the maybe like the face of it has changed, but the idea behind it has stayed the same.
Yep. Okay. Talking Cuban Crisis.
Well, I didn't know if I was for or against it. He was yelling and screaming a mile a minute. Well, he said, here comes the president, but first this word from Pepsodent. Have whiter teeth, have cleaner breath when you're facing nuclear death.
I love that one. I think one of the reasons I love that song so much is because, like, anybody who's familiar with Phil knows how much he idolized Kennedy. But he wasn't afraid to call him out.
So, yeah, one of the things too, like just talking about his honesty. One of the things that I think his family, one of the books said his mother ingrained in him is to just always tell the truth, and he was so principled. I wrote lots of chuckles out of me. I really like the first this word from Pepsodent, whiter teeth, cleaner breath when facing nuclear death. Just like this juxtaposition of like consumerism with like with these horrific images and news and stuff.
Yeah, like I feel like all the talking songs, it's just the same point of like just what a great way to I think really like I just can't I keep harping on the absurdity of it all of his, and during tragedy you can always find something ridiculous in it. And I think that that's such a good way to communicate, this is wrong, but it's also just stupid.
Yeah, it's like the situation is so like absurd that you have to laugh about it. Like,
yeah. And sometimes it's easier instead of like kind of getting on your high horse and like preaching about something, like preaching about the Cuban Missile Crisis or preaching about Vietnam. It's easier to make a joke that basically is like, this doesn't make sense. When you can make fun of something, when you can satire something.
Yeah, it's like Twitter in the early 60s would be like, the Soviet Union has missiles in Cuba, why is nobody talking about this?
Yeah. But yeah, kind of that like, sometimes whenever you present things
Say
that
it louder for the people in the back.
Honestly, yeah.
Sorry.
Here's a thread of petitions you can sign to stop fascism, guys. But yeah, I think it's in all seriousness, I think that's a really good point about like people can get really self-righteous about that kind of thing and get on their high horse and kind of almost like pat themselves on the back for talking about events like that, and Phil kind of brought out the absurdity of that, I think, in a really beautiful way.
It makes it easier to talk about and makes him
absolutely
more. I think it makes people more likely to listen to what he has to say when you hear songs like that,
Serious turn. Too Many Martyrs is the next song, or Ballad of Medgar Evers.
In the state of Mississippi, many years ago, a boy of 14 years got a taste of Southern law. He saw his friend a-hangin', his color was his crime, and the blood upon his jacket put a brand upon his mind. Too many martyrs and too many dead, too many lies, too many empty words were said, too many times for too many angry men. Oh, let it never be again.
Yes, I was gonna say, I remember you had that question, like, is there like a song that like rings true today, like that you can see like a parallel? And I think across the board we could all say Too Many Martyrs.
Definitely, yeah.
I think someone had a sign at a protest that literally said Too Many Martyrs. I think it was in the Phil Oaks Facebook group. The liner notes, it was inspired by a friend of his, a quote from a friend of his. He said, "Oh God, no, we've already got too many martyrs." Phil's friend, the folk music critic Josh Dunson, said on hearing about the assassination of the Black freedom leader Medgar Evers, thus giving Phil the title to this song. They had no way of knowing that a greater martyrdom was still to come.
Yeah. This is definitely a point of the album that it's kind of a downer, which is a really that's an understatement, definitely, of the point of it. But when you get to these songs that you hear now and they're still so real, and you literally only have to replace a few names, a few nouns, and you could sing it, at a rally, and it would have the same effect. But yeah, the chorus itself, you could take that and plant it right in the middle of this year, of this decade.
And I think like we've certainly like come such a long way since the 60s, but in a way we're still right there. We're still dealing with the same issues. Like, I mean, it was,
Yeah.
you know, all those decades ago before, you know, any of us were born, before my parents were born, you know, but we're still dealing with a lot of the same problems. And I think that's, I mean, it's almost hard to fathom, like, even, it's hard to discuss.
It's like every couple of decades, like a younger generation, like, you know, people who are like just voting for the first time decide like we're done dealing with this, especially when it comes to racial issues.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're
like
what's happening.
Movement, you know, kind of took that over, and now we're kind of back in the middle of something like that every couple of decades, and that's the part that really confuses me. Not confuses me, but just is fascinating to me, because we kind of, it lies dormant for a little bit and then spikes again.
Yeah. But yeah, the final song is What's That I Hear.
What's that I hear now ringing in my ears? I've heard that sound before. What's that I hear now ringing in my ears? I hear it more and more. It's the sound of freedom calling, ringing up to the skies. It's the sound of the old ways of falling. You can hear it if you try.
And I really like just the nice optimistic sound that it gives to the album, because it's contrasted with Too Many Martyrs, just right after Too Many Martyrs. It's a sweet ending, and I wrote that you know, Judy Henske said his songs didn't make you feel like you were warming your hands over a campfire like the Kingston Trio. And, you know, you may disagree with that, and I kind of do sometimes. Like, not all of his songs did, but, like, some of his songs do make me feel that way. But she's right. They're not very, like, he doesn't really have a kumbaya. I like these optimistic songs, and these that are like calls to action, that are contrasted with the ones that piss you off. You have his newspaper songs, his article songs that are like, hey, here's a fucked up thing that happened. You know, here's what's going on. Here's what's wrong. And then you have songs like What's That I Hear, and it's like, here's what we're gonna do about it.
Yeah, I think, like, going back to what you said about the call to action, I think, like, to me, I see a direct comparison to, like Pete Seeger and the Almanac Singers and that kind of thing, with songs like Which Side Are You On? Like, that song is a call to action. It's like, here's what's happening, what are you gonna do about it?
Those are the songs that really get me fired up, because I don't know, they feel really relevant still, but they also give me like hope.
That's good. That's a good point.
And I think that's a great way to round out the album. I really enjoy it. I just want to side note, I really enjoy that this discussion has kind of shifted my idea about the album and thinking of it more as an album. Like, some insights have kind of given me, like, okay, here is a start. Like, One More Parade is a great start, because I felt like it was missing a start and an end, you know?
But yeah, because like at the beginning, like, I really did see this album more as like kind of like a bunch of songs rather than one cohesive like album. Kind of felt like a bunch of stuff like together, and not saying it's bad at all, but now I definitely do see it more as like a thing of like, here's the start and like here's the end. Like, you can kind of like see the beginning and the end like clearly.
Yeah, it's still missing like the like aesthetic quality, I think, that other albums have.
Yeah,
It, like,
absolutely.
the glue that holds the album together. But then again, in the early 60s, I don't think like albums were like an art form yet, you know? Like,
absolutely.
You weren't in the studio, you wrote songs, you went and recorded, you know, 10 or 12 songs, and you went home. But then later on, there was kind of the birth of that in the studio, working, experimenting, you know,
absolutely.
I think he followed that. So I think that this album for, you know, the year, for the early 60s, is a pretty good comprehensive album, you know, like,
absolutely.
That's pretty good compared to a lot of other albums released at the time that don't necessarily have a beginning and an end.
I have these reviews, or these excerpts from reviews, and I'm just gonna like rattle them off. Variety called it an interesting platter that could make some noise. New York Times said his songs rarely sound like pamphleteering, but on the other hand, his voice is bland. Boo.
Yeah.
American Record Guide. It says imagery rated lower than Dylan's, but rich in biting and penetrating insight. High Fidelity said Oakes' acidly effective, swings a sharp machete, but on the downside, often naive and occasionally succumbs to cliche.
Okay.
And then Folk Scene simply said Oakes is not a very good songwriter.
All right.
I definitely think that the High Fidelity review is probably the most accurate. Like, though I definitely agree with
Yeah.
that one the most. I think that's good. Actually, folks,
I'm with you there.
that's the one that I agree with the most. I think that they were right on the nose. They're right. He's not a good
Yeah.
songwriter. I don't know why we're even doing this podcast.
No.
It's all like it's funny. Like I really just have to laugh.
Like, I have to laugh. Yeah.
When they're negative, they're really just like they
Yeah.
really dig in. Like I don't
they
know.
really go after him. Like, I feel like he just invited people to just be mean to him almost. I don't know.
Mhm.
Like,
He kind of like welcomed it. He welcomed it.
Oh yeah.
I think he just seemed like an easy target.
Do we want to talk about All the News's album art?
I like
Perfect.
it.
It's perfect.
It's not my favorite, but I like it.
Album art.
It's a good thesis for the album.
Yeah.
I like that.
It's so simple.
But it like says
It's a
so
boy
much
on
at the
his
same
guitar
time.
and his newspaper. You know, it really it says a lot about him and a lot about the album.
Like, as he's holding the newspaper, he's holding just a cigarette in his hand. It's like, I think it's right hand as he's reading the newspaper.
Yeah.
I just think it's Phil. Like, it's just Phil right there in a nutshell. That's him, you know?
Because it's so simple, but like perfectly to the point.
I might be like reading too much into it, but I like the like picture of him holding a cigarette, like reading the newspaper, because like people like like smoke cigarette like almost, I guess, to relax in a sense. Like people do it like like they go outside to take a break to smoke. It's just like something that they do, and then like him like doing that while he's reading the newspaper, like reading all these horrible things that's happening. He's just like smoking a cigarette, something so simple that people do every day. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how to describe what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Just
I
those
like
little
that
things
imagery.
make him
No, I get it.
more human, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you can imagine him, like, that's something that, like, my parents did growing up. My dad would wake up, read the newspaper, and have a cigarette in the morning, you know? And it's interesting thinking about him waking up, grabbing the newspaper, having a cigarette, like everybody else does every morning. But then reading the newspaper and picking up a guitar and saying, I'm going to write what I've just read. You know, that's really...
Yeah.
That's a really
that's Phil. That's just Phil in his purest form.
It's very romantic. It kind of ties back to that romance of him being that great songwriter. Like, it's a very romantic image, you know.
I agree.
It is definitely just quintessentially Phil, and it perfect. It's just a perfect snapshot of who he was at that time.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a great introduction.
It is. Here he is. Like, if you were to actually introduce, hey, this is Phil Oakes. This is what he does. It's that, but in a photograph.
Yeah.
And all the news that's fit to sing is take on New York Times's tagline, all the news that's fit to print. So it's
I love that.
He's really leaning to it being a newspaper on vinyl.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
Which is really cool. Is there anything else we want to say about all the news that's fit to sing?
I mean, I love the album. I think it's a really good, like I said earlier, I think it's a really good breakout album. It's a really strong, debut album.
Yeah, it's definitely a very good first album.
It's a really good showcase of his both lyrical and musical abilities.
More than anything, I think it's a great foundation.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's perfect for him to have built on throughout his career.
You've been listening to God Help the Troubadour, the eternal voice of Phil Oakes. Join us next time for Part 2, I Ain't Marchin' Anymore. This program was created and written by me, Tori Nelson, edited by Tori Nelson and Marie McCarthy, and produced by Marie McCarthy. Special thanks to Zachary Stevenson for lending his voice to written quotes of Phil Oakes. Special thanks to Sally Welch, Mackenzie Solers, and Elizabeth Morris. Music written and performed by Phil Oakes. Farewells and fantasies, folks.